Hi, hello, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're a returning visitor, welcome back. Now, if you were expecting me to be on a narrow boat for the start of this video, you're going to be a little bit disappointed. I'm away visiting family and I'm out for an afternoon walk in some lovely sunshine in a wood. Now in this video, what I want to do is address some of the comments and feedback and thank all my new subscribers. I also want to sort of recap the journey that I made in the narrowboat from the marina where I bought it to where it's wintering, and use that to address some of the comments that I received. I will also be showing you some video of the lock closures that I was desperately trying to avoid. I went back and had a look at them later because I was intrigued as to what they were doing and how they were closing the canals and the work they'd actually be doing. And I'll be wrapping up by telling you how the Grey Wagtail coped with the bad weather we had the other week and also Storm Bert last weekend. In this video, I also want to have a look at the Oxford Canal. The Oxford Canal is very well engineered, and it wasn't until after I'd done the journey and sat down with the maps and looked at it, I realised just what was going on and how that canal works. It's an absolutely fascinating story, in my opinion, particularly when you sit down and look at the maps. So, first of all, a big thank you for all the comments and feedback and for all the people that subscribed. That was absolutely fantastic. I've received some really useful advice about how to get around the corners on the Oxford Canal, which I'm really grateful for, so thank you for that. I will be trying out all the advice in later videos, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already, so you can see how I get on with that. Basically, the advice boiled down to sort of 2-3 things. One was to do with my speed. Some people said I was going too slow, some said I was going too fast. A number of people mentioned the idea of pumping the tiller to get around the corner. And I have seen people do that, and I will try it. Somebody also referred to it sort of rowing. The idea being is that you pump the tiller right over really hard to push the boat around and then correct it and come back. A number of people talked about the idea of a 50p coin, sort of sharp turns and then straight, sharp turns and then straight, sharp turns and then straight to get around. And some people just sort of said, well, the Oxford Canal's a bit of a brute and it's difficult to get around those corners because it's shallow and they're tight and it's difficult. Several people commented about the size of the propeller on the Grey Wagtail, and here's part of a video that I shot of the Grey Wagtail when she was being surveyed. Now, I've got no real point of reference here because my only experience of propellers are the small type of propeller you would find on an outboard engine on a small motorboat on the River Thames. Is this a big propeller, or is this a sort of standard size propeller that you would find on a narrowboat? Please let me know in the comments below because I'm really intrigued by this. To me it looks huge, but maybe it's an average size propeller. A lot of people complimented me on the boat, so thank you very much for that. That's all down to the previous owner. They did a fantastic job in looking after it and improving it, so that's all down to them. A number of people also commented on having more shots from the front of the boat. One of the problems that I faced on the cruise was I was busy trying to steer the boat, and also the front camera was sort of 55 feet away from me and I had no way of controlling it. I either had to turn it on at the beginning and the battery would run out after an hour, or I'd have to hope that I could nip along and turn it on when I was in one of the locks. However, I've now got a cunning plan on how to operate that camera from the stern when I'm going along, and I'll be testing that out in coming videos. One comment I received that really made me laugh was somebody said that they were watching one of the videos when I was doing the sort of tour around the boat, asking questions about what does that do, what does that do, what does that do, and that they were shouting, "It's the inverter," at the screen. Now, a number of people sort of said, didn't the marina that you bought it from give you a tour of the boat? Well, yes, they did. The video that I shot about getting the keys and going onto the boat for the first time when it was my own boat, I shot before I was given a sort of guided tour of the boat by the marina. I wanted that video to be very much a reaction video to sort of capture my genuine reaction to seeing things for the first time, and I think it did, because looking around the boat I didn't know what the stuff did. I genuinely didn't. It was a real surprise to me when I got the guided tour. I went, oh, so that's what the galvanic thingy is. Still don't really know what it does, but that's what it is. Oh, that's the inverter. Also, I was right, that is the Webasto in the corner labelled Webasto, etc. So yes, I did get the guided tour by the marina. So if you come away with the impression that they didn't do a good sales job, they did. They did sort of take me around the boat and explain things. They struggled with a couple of points. They were unable to answer the question about why I had 2 diesel inlets on the boat. They speculated that one of them was an old pump out point. I've since discovered why I've got 2 diesel inlets on the boat, and I'll tell you about that in a later video. You will also be pleased to hear that I now know how most of the stuff on the boat actually works. Having said that, there are still 2 silver boxes that I'm not sure about. I'm sure I will figure them out at some point. I got a huge instruction manual with the book, which I've been reading through and getting to grips with everything. My understanding of volts and amps and amp hours and all that stuff is still a bit hazy, and I need to do a bit more work on that, but I am sure that I will get there and fully understand it sometime in the next decade. So fingers crossed that all goes well. A couple of people commented on the fact of, oh no, not another YouTube channel about narrowboating, which is a fair point. This channel is going to be about narrowboating, and it will most probably be different to other channels because I've got different interests. I'm into science, I'm into history, I'm into sort of geography, so I'll be bringing those aspects in. It won't be so much necessarily about the lifestyle of living on board a narrowboat, and possibly not about the communities on the waterway. It'd be more about the history, because that fascinates me. It'd be about the science, the engineering, the architecture of narrowboats and the canals of the UK. So hopefully I'm bringing something slightly different to YouTube with the videos that I'm making. Anyway, enough of all this. Let's have a look at the sort of recap of my 3-day cruise to move the narrowboat over from the marina where I bought it over to where it is spending the winter. Now hopefully you've watched my other videos and you know that I had to move the narrowboat from the Wilton to the Cropredy Marina, which, although only 14 miles apart, are some 30 miles and 30 locks by narrowboat. I had a plan. It was a 3-day plan. And the reason I needed to do the move was because locks at Braunston and Knapton Hill were closing, and I had to get it over to the new marina. On day 1, my aim was to move from the Wilton Marina to the village of Braunston. The first problem I faced was getting the boat out of the marina, and even at this stage I can now see from the comments that I've received that I'm really oversteering the boat. I'm pushing that tiller around far too much in trying to get the boat to move. So in the future I will be following the advice of sticking to the 45-degree maximum on the tiller to actually get the boat to move. My first lock was within 2 minutes of leaving the marina, and it was here I encountered the first help that I had on my journey. There were people on the towpath that were willing to help me and my camera-shy lock helper. It was great to have these people around to give advice and to give help and support. And in the first lock it started to rain, and as somebody said in the comments, what do you expect? You're in a boat on water in the winter. It's going to rain. Of course you're going to get wet. That's the nature of boating. In the 30 locks I went through on this cruise, whenever I encountered anybody, they were always so helpful and encouraging and would assist whenever they could. It was really, really nice that these people stepped up and helped a newbie boater. One part of day 1 I was concerned about was going through the Braunston Tunnel, and I received some great advice in the video comments. Some people said about turning on the lights inside the boat so that they shine out and help me see the walls of the tunnel. So that's fantastic advice, thank you. And a number of people commented on the fact that my tunnel light is very bright and that it needs to be pointing more towards the right hand side, that is towards the right hand wall, so I don't blind oncoming boaters. Now I've had a look at the light and I can twist it back a little bit so it points up at the ceiling more, but there's no way to move it right. I might have a look at it to see if I can sort of chock it out a little bit with some extra washers on the right hand side so it does point more to the right hand side of the tunnel. On day 1 we made excellent progress and I was just 2 locks short of getting into Braunston. Now this lock was part of the problem. This is lock 3 in the Braunston flight, and it was incredibly leaky, and it took us nearly 30 minutes to get the lock filled. If you watch to the end of the video, you'll see the work that's being carried out on that lock now by the CRT. On day 2 I was on my own, so I decided to wear my life jacket just in case as a newbie I fell into any of the locks. And a couple of people have said that was a very sensible thing for me to do, so I will continue to do it. Now, while it's not shown here, one of the mistakes I made at the end of the first day was to moor my boat up using the bow line, the stern line and the centre line. A number of people on YouTube have commented that this is bad practice to use the centre line for mooring, and this led to a little bit of discussion online. It turns out that if you use the centre line, because it's high up on the roof of the boat, the attachment point, then if the boat is moved in any way by another boat going by or the water levels rising, it can actually tip the boat over because of the high contact point, high above the sort of centre of gravity. Whereas the lines at the front and the stern of the boat are lower down, so it won't tip over. Also, with the lines at the front and the back, the boat can move up and down the canal, whereas with it attached by the centre line, it can only sort of move in and out from the bank of the canal, which again is not very good for the boat or the banks of the canal. One highlight of the trip for me was cruising through the village of Braunston. Absolutely remarkable place, so full of history, so many canal boats, absolutely blown away by the place. One thing that I hadn't appreciated and got wrong in the day 2 video was that this turn under this bridge, and as usual I made a hash of the turn, was a turn from the Grand Union to the Oxford Canal. In the video I said I was still on the Grand Union Canal. It's interesting that as you complete this turn it still feels and looks like the Grand Union Canal. It's still a wide canal, whereas later on it suddenly becomes very, very narrow. And it was at that narrow point that I thought the Oxford Canal had in fact started. I'd also like to thank everybody who commented on my steering and gave me some invaluable advice about what I was doing wrong. And I will be having a go at correcting my mistakes in later videos and trying out some of the advice that I've been given. So thank you very much for that, and please keep the comments and the advice coming in. So on day 2, my first solo cruise, I completed 7 miles and 2 locks, and I was quite pleased with my progress, but I hadn't appreciated just how far I still had to go. Day 3 had a slightly dodgy start with a faulty ignition switch on the boat, which I guess was a good introduction to the delights of canal life and boat life. Problems happen, you've got to step up, sort them out, and work out what it is you need to do to get going. Day 3 was also the start of my real boating troubles. The canal now was very narrow and very, very shallow in places, and I was really struggling to move the boat around the corners. The locks now were incredibly narrow, so it was really testing me on my boat handling skills. And as I said earlier, thanks for all the help and advice about what I'm doing wrong around these corners, because I need to get that sorted out. I'll be putting into practice the advice, so hopefully I don't have another incident like I had with bridge 122, where I hit the bridge with my boat and did some damage to the cratch cover and cratch board at the front. It was shortly after bridge 122 that I encountered what I've dubbed Farm Bend, where the canal passes through a farmyard. And I think it's this part of the video that a number of viewers picked up on about how bad my steering is, how much I was working the boat too hard and pushing the tiller over too far. So a big thanks to everybody for the advice. I'll be looking at the 50p approach, and I won't be taking that tiller beyond the 45-degree angle, because from what you're telling me, it's just a waste of time taking the tiller that far around. It's not going to make any difference at all. Some comments about the amount of power I was using, and I should be using more power as I'm coming out of the corners, slow in and power out. Again, I will be trying that, so thank you very much for your comments and advice. At the end of day 3 it was clear that I wasn't going to complete the cruise in 3 days, and that it was going to turn into a 4-day cruise. As we left Fenny Compton on day 4, we passed through the Fenny Compton tunnel, and I became intrigued by this tunnel and asked Why is it a tunnel when it's not a tunnel? It's clearly marked as a tunnel on the map. And a big thank you to everyone that told me it used to be a tunnel that has had the roof removed. Now, of course, the question becomes, why did it have the roof removed? So I'll be looking into that in a later video because I want to know why. It's very odd. Do tunnels regularly have their roofs removed? The rest of the day was fairly uneventful, and I polished off the last 6 or 7 miles and 3 locks that I needed to complete before I got to the Cropredy Marina. But I did get to encounter my one and only swing bridge of the trip, which luckily for me was open. The last part of my journey was essentially a reverse of the beginning. I arrived at the marina and I had to park the narrowboat. As usual, I made a hash of things and almost parked the narrowboat in the wrong berth. Overall, I was very pleased with the progress I'd made. I'd covered the 30 miles and 30 locks in not 3 days but 4, and I was now safely moored up in the marina. A few days after arriving in the marina, I went back to have a look at the lock that had given me all the problems. That is lock number 3 on the Braunston flight, to see how the work was getting on. And it was quite amazing to see the CRT in there. They're replacing the lock gates and doing an incredible amount of work. It had been drained and all the CRT stuff was in place. The lock was completely closed off. You could still get down towards the lock via the towpath, so I went down to have a look to see what the CRT were doing. They certainly had a lot of CRT equipment on site, and it was interesting to see how they'd closed off the lock. It seemed to be using a series of plastic sheets and large pieces of wood. Water was still able to flow around the side of the lock to keep the canal further downstream filled. From what I could see through the fence, the new gates were in place and they looked fantastic. Hopefully these new gates will prevent further leaks at the lock. I assume they're going to also replace the lower gates because they were the ones that were leaking the most. A few weeks ago I passed through the Napton flight on the Oxford Canal and I knew it was due for closure for winter repairs. At lock 12 the top gate was closed and the lock was sealed off. What I hadn't been prepared for was when I looked down towards lock 11 that the canal would be drained. It was very strange to see the canal with no or very little water in it, and I could just see how shallow it was, which explained why I'd had so many problems trying to steer along it a few weeks ago. It was also interesting to see the mud at the bottom of the canal and the things that had fallen into it over the years. And this was the lock on which the work was being done, Napton Lock 11. At the lock they appear to be repairing one of the walls. With the lock drained, it was interesting to see the canal architecture that you normally wouldn't see. Beyond lock 11 the canal was at its usual water level, but I still couldn't get over the sight of the empty canal and the fact that the water was being held back by one closed gate. Seeing the empty canal made me think about the route that it takes, so I went back and had a look at the map. You can clearly see that the route of the canal is very, very windy. This is one of the sharpest bends on the Oxford Canal, and you can see the canal winding slowly across the countryside here. It takes a very indirect route, or what appears to be a very indirect route. However, if you look at the 115 metre contour line, you'll see the canal pretty much follows that route. It really highlights the fact that this is a contour canal. If you look at the contours, you can see how the ground is sloping up away from the canal, and how the ground determines the route of the canal. As you're heading south, the ground on your left is sloping upwards, whereas the ground on the right is sloping away from you. This canal is really hugging the hillside as it goes around this corner. Now, one thought that occurred to me is, why bother with this? Why not just cut the corner off? Well, if you look at the map, the answers are there. First of all, you need to go uphill and then you need to go downhill. And to do that on a canal, you need to put in a couple of locks. And as we know, it takes time to go through locks. So that would have added time to the journey. Plus, where does the water come from for that upper stretch of canal? Every time those locks are opened, water is going to drain out. So it would need a water supply. Alternatively, a tunnel could be put in. But, as with the locks, this costs money. Plus, on the canal, the horses would have to have been uncoupled, walked over the top, and then the boats legged through. And again, that would have taken time. So it was cheaper and, in the long term, quicker for the canal boats for the canal to hug the contour and go around the hill and continue on its journey south. Interestingly, if you look a little north of that notoriously sharp bend and go back to Napton on the Hill, you can again see how the canal hugs the contours. As I came along this stretch of canal, it struck me that I seemed to be going around Napton on the Hill, and it wasn't until after the trip I looked at a map I realised that I'd almost done 3 sides of a square going around the hill. Again, if you look at the map, you can really see how the canal is following the contour, how it's cut into the side of the hill, and how it avoids the really steep parts of the village. And here is the contour that the canal is following, the 100-metre contour. For us, we have modern Ordnance Survey maps, and so it's fairly easy for us to spot the best route that the canal should take. However, the canal reached Napton in 1790, and the official birthday of the Ordnance Survey in the UK was the 21st of June 1791, so the canal arrived at Napton before the birthday of the Ordnance Survey. There was a map produced between 1747 and 1755, which is a 1.75 inches to the mile map, but it didn't really go into detail showing all the contours. So it blows my mind that the engineers at the time were really working with a blank sheet. Yes, they knew where villages were, but they didn't have any idea of the contours or the lie of the land. They had to get out there and work it out for themselves. Anyway, an incredible feat of engineering. So what about Storm Bert? I decided to pop up to the marina and have a look at the Grey Wagtail to see how she had fared. Okay, found the Grey Wagtail. Bit odd. The crutch covers are undone on both sides. I definitely did those up before I left, so I don't know what's going on there. That's a bit worrying. Well, that's a bit odd. I wonder how they became undone. Very odd indeed. Rest of the narrowboat looks okay. Nothing obvious. Let's see what things are like inside. Small amount of water has got into the boatman's cabin. The seat is damp in here. And there's a lot of water on the ceiling of the boat. I don't know where that's come from. That's worrying. I'll have to wipe that down. Engine area looks dry, which is good. Nothing obvious here. Quite cold on board. Moving through. Boat feels cold and damp, but looks generally okay, which is good news. So you can't see anything obvious. Time to get some heating on in here, I think, dry the place out a bit. Well, the Grey Wagtail survived the worst of Storm Bert. There was that water that got into the back cabin. I was able to dry the seat out, I dried the ceiling out. I'm unsure how the water got in there. I think it settled on the roof and then blew under the actual sort of hatch at the back. But the worst damage was to the cratch cover at the front where it blew out a zip. It's damaged the top of the cratch cover. There should be a metal clasp there keeping it together. So looks like I'm going to have to break out a needle and thread and repair that section. Now, if you're wondering where I am, I'm by the River Thames, and this isn't a lake behind me, it's in fact a flooded area. You can just possibly pick out some boats behind me that are down on the river, and I'm currently standing in about a foot of water here. Anyway, if you've enjoyed these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. There should be a QR link on the screen now that will take you through to the newsletter, which you can subscribe to and get updates on the Grey Wagtail as I go along. In the next video, I'll be looking at how I'm getting on board in learning how all the electrics work, how the diesel stove works, and how all the other bits and pieces fit together. Because on the cruise over, I spent all my time driving the boat. I was on the stern, and I didn't get to really experience or look at the material inside. So that will be the next video. Thanks again for watching, thanks again for subscribing if you've already subscribed, and a big thank you to everybody who sent in all those helpful comments, which I will be putting into action in a later video. Bye for now.